We will this morning continue to consider the wisdom of the Proverbs. How many of us here already have enough wisdom? Come on, somebody here's got to have it all, don't they? You still need a little bit more? Some of you know me well enough to know there's several instances each week where I could use a fair dose more. We have been considering the actions of wisdom, having sought out knowledge and then understanding. Those who would then seek to, from understanding wisdom. We were talking last week about the first 4 actions of the wise people. They hear others. They're not the ones that are anxious to speak, not so convinced that everything they have to say everybody needs to hear. More so, they revere the Lord, the things that are holy, the things the Lord considers holy. And the wise people are still actively seeking wisdom. That's why I asked that question. You got enough of it? Nope. Maybe sometimes I act wisely, but sometimes I better keep seeking it. And as we were concluding last week, the wise people make wisdom their closest companion. We talked last week, and we will again today, how Solomon uses this word receive. You receive wisdom. And it's like a marriage. You take her as unto yourself, to have her, to hold her, to embrace her as your closest companion. As I summarized it last week, then in that sense, wisdom as your closest companion has got your back. You know, it might be able to, the world might turn you in every which direction, cause you to lose focus, in some way you could get out of line, but wisdom's, in a sense, got her arm around you and got your back, steering you in the right direction. She is our best companion, or our best friends. Well, we like our best friends when they just tell us what we want to hear, but what does a best companion have to do? Sometimes even best friends must tell us what we don't want to hear. And that's the 5th action of a wise person, is he accepts reproof and correction. Look at Proverbs chapter 9, verses 8 and 9. How many of us like to be corrected? I'm not even asking Dina. I know the answer to that. Sorry. How many of us like to be corrected? Not too many. But look at chapter 9, verses 8 and 9. Give instruction to the wise, verse 8. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Somebody's either going to despise you for sound counsel, or they're going to treasure the counsel they received. Verse 9, give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase his learning. There's so many of these proverbs that have to do with what to make of the know-it-all. You know, you think about this being written to Solomon's sons, they probably think they're pretty special. You know, Dad's king after all, and Dad's wise, and everybody will think we're wise, and we're rich, and we know it all. No, not so, is it? Yes, Joe?
Well, in the scripture here you're talking about too, is like, he will be still wiser.
Still wiser.
So you can talk to somebody, and they can be a yes person and say, yeah, you're right, yeah, you're right. But he's not taking it in to be wiser still.
Yeah. That ties into our lesson this morning. And again, the way Solomon uses the word receive. Yeah, you can go, yeah. What do people say? Yada, yada, yada. You didn't get anything out of that. But still wiser. You got to receive it. You know, and you've got to receive it even when wisdom tells you what you don't want to hear. Sometimes she has to do that to me.
Sometimes
It-
he has to shake it, cage.
Can do that too.
Shake the
But
cage.
again, that's why I asked, does any of us have all the wisdom we need? Long way from it. The advantage here is the wise man is still teachable. He's still teachable. And yet, why is he teachable in verse 10? The fear of the Lord. He has a reverence for all the things of God, those things that God holds as holy. He reveres God. The wise person in chapter 10, go to chapter 10 and verse 8. The wise of heart will receive commands. Again, this word receive. But a babbling fool will be ruined. Why will he be ruined? Well, the wise commands just bounces off of him like a stone skipping off a babbling brook. He's ruined. The wise in heart embraces the instruction. The foolish man is ruined. That word ruin means he's thrown down. He comes to ruin by the exact same instruction. I've always found that amazing about God's word. The same word that saves is the same word that condemns. By many will be perfected, many will come to ruin. But again, the wise man is always teachable. Go a couple of pages over then to Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 1. Here you can picture Solomon writing this to his primary audience, which is his own sons. Chapter 13 and verse 1. A wise son accepts his father's discipline, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. I remember at certain ages, I won't name names, but a couple of my teenage sons, they just didn't hear, particularly the younger one. It just didn't hear, did he? Just wouldn't listen. The scoffer does not listen to a rebuke. Just won't. In our family, we call that the Brown syndrome. That's sort of... there's one branch of the family that's kind of known for the... Well, there's some parts of the Myers clan that do too. But, when they receive chastening, the wise man actually wants to be corrected. Again, let's take a turn of a few pages over to Proverbs 21 and verse 11. Proverbs 21 and verse 11. When the scoffer is punished, the naive become wise. But when the wise is instructed, he receives knowledge. The naive here is the one that's open-minded. He's open to learning. He doesn't know everything. He wouldn't be jaded as the foolish man would be. He's not given over to foolishness anyway, but he's open to learning. The naive here has the sense of one who's open-minded enough to see the consequences of foolish behavior. They can see how others have lived. I think Solomon wants his own sons to look outside their privileged lives and see the consequences of foolish behavior so that they know how to treat other people. If one can learn from the sinners suffering the consequences, if they can learn from someone else punishment, he might become wise. When the wise is instructed, what's he receiving? Still more knowledge. So many times we see this. He's seeking to learn from others' mistakes. Doesn't want to do that again. One of the things Dina was thankful for is her brother and sister are a great number of years older than her. And she had really about 16 years to watch her brother and sister make mistakes in their lives. And by the time she came to that age that we would marry, she knew, well, we're not going to do this and we're not going that way. We surely aren't going to do that. There's a benefit of that. She received knowledge from being open to learn from others' mistakes. In that way, you see this, one verse talks about gaining still more wisdom, receiving still more knowledge. There's a progressive transformation, isn't there? We don't go from here to here in any one step. There's a progressive transformation. And it is possible for the naive, and that is just those who are open-minded, those who seek for what they don't know. He learns from others' suffering, and based on that, he wants to be taught. It's interesting, again, how many times Solomon uses that word. In wanting to be taught, in whatever way he could learn. Look at Proverbs 29 and verse 15. Proverbs 29 and verse 15. The rod and reproof gives wisdom. The rod and reproof. Notice how it said, two things acting as one, giving reproof. You know, it's one thing to have a measuring rod, but if you don't use it, no benefit in that. This listed as two things working as one reminds me of the prophecies following the captivity. You remember following captivity when it's looking forward to the coming of the Good Shepherd? Zechariah 17 and verse 11 says, I, speaking of the Good Shepherd, I took for myself two staffs, the one I call favor, the other I call union, or the one, some translations say, the one I call beauty, the other I call band. There's that measuring rod that trains us in righteousness. Well, it also bands us together. It also bands together the righteous, isn't it? So two of them have to be working together to train us in righteousness and then band us together. Again, it's that matter of making wisdom your close companion. And so being in that mindset, having been so trained, the sixth action of wisdom, and here's a biggie, is chapter 10 and verse 14. I said earlier that, there are times when I could certainly use more wisdom, and chapter 10 and verse 14 speaks to it. The wise think before acting. Wise men store up knowledge, but with the mouth of the foolish, ruin is at hand. A wise man storing up knowledge. He's listening before he speaks. They're wise because they're silent. Solomon speaks of that several times. Wise because they're listening. They're storing up knowledge for when it is profitable, use it. It's quite difficult to learn if you're always the first one to speak. As we have considered before, James talks about being slow to hear, or quick to hear and slow to speak. And he's talking about the counsel of God. Well, this one who is slow to speak is also practicing the seventh action of the wise. And the seventh action of the wise is another really big one. It is humility. What really proves those moments when we're lacking wisdom? When we get ourselves set up about this high? I finally, through the years, got to where I could almost recognize it coming. Paul, you're about to get knocked down here a little bit because you're just up here a little bit too high. You think you've got it all figured out on your own. Look at chapter 11 and verse 2. When pride comes, then comes dishonor. But with the humble is wisdom. With the humble is wisdom. This reminds me of that silly old country song. Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble. When you're what, Jeff? When you're perfect in every way. I can't wait to look in the mirror. I get better looking each day. And that person really does think, as that song says, to know me is to love me. You know, how could you not? Well, that's the problem. Psalm 36 and verse 12, the doers of iniquity have fallen. And they're, sometime or another, they're going to fall. But then standing alongside the humble is wisdom. But chapter 11, verse 2, but with the humble is wisdom. Standing there right alongside him, bound together with him. Wisdom again having their back, right there. Well, of such a person that is achieved that level or attained that level of humility and wisdom, what's the eighth action of that? Look at chapter 11, verse 30 and 31. The eighth action of the wise people. Chapter 11, verse 30. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life. And he who is wise does what? Wins souls. Whether you take that spiritually or just as a general principle in life. He who is wise is doing what? He's influencing others for good, isn't he? He's teaching others. He who is wise. He's concerned about others' well-being. Again, you can imagine Solomon writing this to his sons. They would tend to be very self-centered, wouldn't they? You know, we got it all. We're rich. We're princes. Well, they would have little concern, perhaps, for anybody else's well-being. But this speaks of having concern for others in this life and for the next. It as much as says that foolishness is death, but the fruit of righteousness is life. When you talk about fruit, there's got to be some action there. And that's what Solomon is encouraging. The wise person wins souls. And even if you're just talking about a general principle, you're influencing people, bringing them to a better way of living, a more focused way of living, a profitable way. A way that benefits all. And so that is one of those treasured actions of wisdom. And based on knowledge and understanding, how would you, having influenced somebody in that way, another action of the wise is the wise associate with the wise. And why would they do so? Because together they are looking for the purpose of life. The 10th action of wisdom is in Proverbs 14, verses 8 and 9. This is one of many proverbs which talk about the associations. How careful do we need to be about those with whom we closely associate? Proverbs 14, verses 8 and 9. The wisdom of the sensible is to understand his way, but the foolishness of fools is deceit. Fools mock at sin, but among the upright there is goodwill. The wisdom of the sensible is to understand his own way. What is he seeking? What does he want to see? He wants to examine his own life. They not only consider what they will do, but they reflect on what they have done. And so there's a soberness in examining their own lives. And then what they would see wrong is corrected, isn't it? What's the reality sometimes? People that are foolish and are given to that way of foolishness, they don't even want to stop to consider their error. Yeah, Jill.
Well, it was, Dee and I were talking, and she was saying the exact same thing that you were saying this morning, that she had this, she didn't want to follow her siblings. And Solomon here, I can really relate, because, you know, I didn't make those the right choices when I was, before I became a Christian, but you also, like you're saying here, he's stripping himself there in this Proverbs for himself too.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying, basically, I know this because I do this.
Yep.
And, you know, and that's, because I was pretty stubborn, I didn't listen, I thought, you know, whatever, but Jeannie came along, and boy, I tell you what, that did literally brought me to my knees, because I knew there had to be something more than Jeannie in the body that didn't work. I knew there had to be something beyond that.
And that way it sobered you up to the realities.
And then, so if I see somebody doing something, it really upsets me, because it's pointing its finger back at what I used to do.
Yeah. And there's credit.
I'm free from that. You know,
There's credibility in that. Why does Solomon have credibility to write this? You know, as you said, he's got to open himself up, say, this is how I failed. This is what had to change in me. And by a reverence for things holy, the things of God, it was transformative. As we mentioned earlier, it's bit by bit transformative. We don't get there all at once. We're still not all there yet. But there is some credibility in that. Just a little bit later, he's going to talk for the second time about the problems of alcohol. Plenty of us have made mistakes with that. Well, he can speak to that with credibility. And so there is reflection in these verses. He's talking about reflection. What did I do? Why did I do that? How can I avoid doing that? Yeah, Jeff.
If we don't look back and reflect on those things, it'll be like Gina, saying, well, that's the brown gene, I can't figure it out. I can look at some of the things that my dad does that I don't care for. But if I don't look at myself and reflect on it and say, I don't want to be like that, then we're no better off. I mean, that's just the way I was. We can't have that, because we've got to constantly be looking at ourselves and improving, being more Christ-like. Because otherwise, we're just going to be wallowing in the same hole.
And you do have the knowledge, whether it's your dad or anybody else, you do have the knowledge of the consequences that they are going to face. And what are you trying to do? Trying to help them avoid that. You'd like to win him over to a different way of thinking. I mean, even if we're not thinking on a spiritual level about membership in the church, which I know you are, but you're trying to win them to a better way of thinking, a more profitable way of living. And I don't mean my money, but in giving peace and comfort and having a real sense of what is worthwhile and what is not. You have that knowledge, and so you try to move them a bit. Well, you also have to reflect on your own ways. Again, this matter of trying to move somebody to influence others, that's the 11th action of the wise in chapter 14 and verse 16. A wise man is cautious and turns away from evil. What he's talking about? He's talking about repentance. A wise man is cautious and turns away from evil. When he's gone the wrong way, he's going to turn. But a fool is arrogant and careless. The wise man will change his mind. And again, as Jill alluded to, Solomon has examined himself. He's confessing his error. And he changed course, didn't he? In other words, it's proven repentance. What good does knowledge and understanding if you don't apply it in proven repentance? To change. That's simply what Solomon wants his sons and everyone to be able to do, to see the worth of that. to follow through on that, not just to think, well, this is just who I am. I'm a sinner, and this is, and I can't change. That's not true of anybody. Not true of anybody in a right mind, I would say. But Solomon has changed his mind and his way. And so what's next? The 12th action of those who have done that is just what we were alluding to, Jeff. The 12th action of those who attained wisdom is they are teaching others. Look at chapter 15 and verse 7. The lips of the wise spread knowledge, but the hearts of fools are not so. You ever known really foolish people that care one way or another what happens to other people? How concerned are they? If it seems like if you're given to a lifestyle of foolishness, you don't really look any further than yourself. What do I want to do to party this weekend? What's going to make me happy? It gets very, well, if not so much self-focused, there's still not a means to care about the needs of others. Well, this one, the wise man teaches others. The lips of the wise spread knowledge. He seeks to enlighten those who are in the dark. And that's just as we were talking about, just as you were talking about, Jill. You've seen, several of these verses talk about what you've seen in others. You see them suffer the consequences. If you see the pitfall that's in their path, you're going to hold up a sign, and hopefully they'll read the sign, and hopefully they'll receive the instruction on the sign.
And I think that for people to not lose heart, because the ones that stuck in my mind, even though they probably didn't think they had any kind of influence on me, were the ones that stuck by their convictions, and the ones that didn't go along with what everybody else was doing. That I can still remember them, and I'll never forget them. But they may not even, they don't probably even know the influence that they have on me.
And that would paint the picture this way. In humility, they stuck by their convictions. They weren't coming at you like, I'll show you.
And I thought, I always thought, wow, I didn't realize it at the time, but I can really look back and see how even just those few contacts that I had, I really respect them.
The people I remember, and Dina will know the men that I'm referring to, the 2 or 3 elders back there in Orange, Texas. Firm in the knowledge of the Word, even-handed in the application of it, and the most humble men I've ever known in my life. And that's the example. When I think about wise men and the way that they applied it, that's what I can look at them, I can see that. And I can also see in what ways I'm not yet quite that. And so the lips of the wise spread knowledge. We come to this one I mentioned earlier. It's the second time that Solomon has talked about the problem of alcohol. In the 13th action, well, remember from chapter 1, he told his sons, in effect, not to hang around with those who are given to strong drink. Figuratively, the language is those who are hanging over the punch bowl, and the whole reason they would party is just to get drunk. There's a great many people, that's kind of the essence of life, just to party, to get drunk. Look at chapter 20 and verse 1. A verse I'm sure you've all heard. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is intoxicated by it is not wise. Avoid alcohol. It's not a blanket prohibition, but think he's writing to younger people. What do younger people not understand about alcohol? What they don't understand is what it's going to lead to. I mean,
Jill talked about this whenever alcohol gets involved, even if you do have a strong conviction, it loosens you up to where you'll do things you wouldn't necessarily ever do. It makes you forget, I think, for a time, what is the wise thing to do, because your inhibitions are lowered. You see these silly, we were watching this video last week of this guy that got stopped by a cop, and I think it was on that show, Northern, the fishing game show, whatever it was. Anyway, the fishing game guy stopped to help, and the guy was stopped in his house, and he couldn't understand why he was still in trouble. He was home. He made it home. He didn't hit anybody, he didn't kill anybody. And he was so ridiculous, and so it was funny, but it's sad too, because sober, he probably wouldn't have acted that way. And they had to arrest him because he wouldn't take his sobriety test because he was drunk. But
They essentially had to arrest him because it was impossible for him to reason.
exactly, they couldn't get reason with him. Yeah.
You know, one must be aware of the danger before you take that first drink. A young person hasn't lived long enough to see those people who have suffered their lives through with that severe problem, that addiction to drinking. You got to know it up front, because even if you're just halfway intoxicated, you're not thinking with the right mind. You know, I mentioned it before, some of us have been there. I have been there. Thankfully, it's a long time ago, but I was fortunate. That word intoxicated literally means to mislead mentally, to mislead morally. Yes, Larry?
Scrambles your daggone brain.
You just don't have all your wits to reason at your best. Even the first drink is misleading. You need to understand that, because it's going to change the way you think about the second one. You got to know. And it's just, now I found this true in my life, it's just best to avoid it altogether. It's just best to avoid it altogether. In my own experience, I could be misled pretty easy. Just don't. And so, again, I keep it in context. Wise older man is telling his younger sons, you got to know this before you go down that road in your life. You probably ought not do this because of its dangers. It's, again, about being careful with our associations. The 14th action of the wise is rejecting fools. Chapter 20, verse 26. This is an interesting one. Well, they all are, but this. A wise king winnows the wicked and drives the threshing wheel over them. It sounds a little extreme, and it is stated in a way to be extreme, just to make the point. When he talks about winnow, my New American Standard says winnows. It might say sifts the wicked. What do you have there, Roger? Winnows? Winnoweth, yeah. A process, yeah. There's a process. You're continually doing this. The second part of it is exaggerated to make the point, and drives the wheel over them. You trying to destroy them? No, you're trying to put down the wickedness that they practice. Drive it down. Driving down the wicked is not giving rise to increase wickedness then. You see what's, sometimes you do have to winnow those you associate with, don't you? You got to winnow that out. Sifts, and more so in a personal sense. You're sifting the wickedness from your own self, isn't it? Later this morning in the lesson, we're going to talk about James saying to born-again Christians to remove all that remains of filth and wickedness. There's going to be some self-winnowing going on to sift out that the ugliness that's still in you. Drive it down.
We went to a deal that the Amish had put on, and it was about cell phones, computers, and the guy that was talking wasn't even Amish. He basically made it sound like if you use a cell phone, if you use a computer, if you use this, it's going to take your soul, basically. And so the whole talk was abstaining. I understand that abstaining.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that I addressed was I said, one thing I did not hear in that whole talk was self-control. Self-control, I mean, it's easy to, they don't let them go skiing, they don't let them do these things, they don't let them do this because they might get caught up into it. But I also think there's got to be talk about self-control too. I think you can have a balance. A person can overeat, a person can,
Say that.
they can, whatever it is, if you don't have that self-control and in moderation, anything can be considered a sin.
That's what wisdom's all about in this. What's Solomon teaching? He's teaching very privileged, wealthy people that could abuse anybody and everybody, and telling, no, tamper that down. Drive that kind of wickedness down. Control yourself. So that's what needs to be sifted first, is control all that. Control how you approach the temptations of life. Control who you choose to associate with. If you know you cannot influence them to do something better, then remove that from you. Yes, Jeff?
The driving the threshing wheel over them, basically the threshing wheel is what separates the grain from the chaff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's separating. Winnowing is the wind or a fan or whatever.
Okay, you're right.
Blowing,
Yeah.
and that's getting the chaff away. So you're separating good from evil, and then you're getting rid of evil.
So you're preserving what is good,
Right.
casting off what is not.
Exactly. And that's what a wise king does with the wicked. And it's the same thing, you can apply that to what's going to happen in the end.
Well, how do you know what to keep and what to get rid of, Jeff? The next action of wisdom has to do with that somewhat. How do you recognize that the wheat is good and the chaff is the part you don't want? You got to have a set of values by which to judge that, don't you? You got to know this is worth keeping, that I really need to get rid of. The 15th action, this will be what we wind up with this morning. He wisely deals with what is valuable. He knows what is worthwhile. He's going to use it in the best manner. Chapter 21, verse 20. There is precious treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man swallows it up. Well, the foolish man, has got some riches in his hand and he's going to blow through it, really. If you apply this to money, he deals wisely with his resources, deals wisely with his money. He saves it up. Money doesn't own him, rather he possesses it to do good. There's nothing wrong with having a degree of wealth if you're going to use it well. But the moment that those things possess you, then really you've the moment that it possesses you, you've essentially blown the wealth, haven't you? The benefit of it is lost if it possesses you. And on the other hand, money doesn't flow through his fingers like water. It doesn't mean, again, it's the measurement of what is good versus what is bad. It doesn't mean that one is miserly, but neither is he careless. So what are you talking about again, Jill? Neither is he miserly or is he careless. It's self-control. To know the best use of those things that we have, to use them to the best end, it's self-control.
Sometimes if you don't have no one around you and you do a mistake, take hold of that mistake to not do it again.
Well, again, that's one of the actions we've considered.
That's what I'm trying to refer to. Make a mistake to learn that you do not want to do that mistake again.
Yeah, one of those actions we've considered this morning is he is not only controlling what he will do, but he's evaluating what he has done. To see the shortcoming in that, to see how he might do better in the future. So there's the actions of wisdom. Next week we'll consider the benefits of it. Those who seek it in this way and want to use wisdom in this way are greatly benefited from it. So we'll best conclude there this morning and be grateful for the opportunity to assemble together. Let's look forward to giving our best worship to God this morning.